Hi, welcome back to my class, Cross-Cultural Understanding, with me, Andreas Yulianto from Jakarta International University, Indonesia. Today is the seventh meeting of this class, and the topic is about ethnocentrisms and othering, barriers to the intercultural communications. We have discussed a lot about intercultural communications. Now it's time for us to learn and to understand the barriers to the intercultural communication itself. And we're going to discuss the ethnocentricisms and othering as the barriers in the process of the communications, especially intercultural communications. Now let's begin with the learning objectives of this class. All right, I have prepared 10 learning objectives. The first, discuss the implications of social categorizations and othering for intercultural relations. The second, define and discuss the nature of the ethnocentrism. The third, distinguish between a generalization and a stereotype. Fourth, describe the process of stereotyping and provide examples of stereotypes. Fifth, provide examples of sexist and ageist language. Sixth, explains how stereotypes can serve as barriers to intercultural communications. 7. Define and provide examples of bias and prejudice. 8. Define and provide examples of discriminations and discriminatory language. 8 and 9. Define and discuss the nature of racism and 3 types of racism. And the last, describe the potential impact of racism and xenophobia on intercultural relations. All right, Law in 1986, page 197, wrote very comprehensive ideas about differences and the phenomena about the differences. It's not our differences that divide us. Wow, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. I absolutely agree with this. Yeah, some people sometimes find it difficult to live in a situations where they have met or they are in a very different from them. And true that the problem is not because of the differences, but it's just because of the inability to recognize, to accept, and celebrate those differences. Right? We'll talk deeply in these sessions about the differences and how we overcome them, how we respond wisely about the differences. We begin with introductions by Semofer et al. 2012 here. The differences and the response to say the differences is just because it is from our preferences. Yeah. In the previous chapter, we talk about the nature and the characteristics of and also the types of identities, right? And positively, negative can provide us with a sense of belonging. But then in the opposite side, identities can be the basis for negative views and reactions to people who are different from us. Absolutely, it can be used as the categorizations and also the negative perspective about others. Yeah. The preferences for things that we understand and are familiar with can at firstly influence our perceptions of an attitude toward new and different people and things. Right. What we are familiar with, what we understand about certain things, about certain characteristics, it becomes the indicator to see people, to see others, to see other things. And sometimes, because of this preference, it can lead to the stereotyping, prejudice, racism, and ethnocentrism. Now let's talk about these social categorizations and othering. All right, because we have the identities, we have preference, then we do the social categorizations. All right, it refers to the way we group people into conceptual categories in order to make sense of our increasingly complex social environment. And yeah, it cannot be denied that it is led by the perceptions, and it entails the act of perceptions. Here, becoming aware of knowing or identifying by means of sense through three steps. This is what we have done. This is what we do when we are categorizing people or things. The first, selection. After we select a particular identities, then we organize, we are organizing, and we interpretation. We do the interpretations. Yeah, in the process, we group people into different categories based on our current understandings, perceptions, and also our experience. And of course, we make inferences about individual behavior based on the group patterns. And yeah, unfortunately, this process leads to essentialism, where it is the positions that the attributes and the behavior of socially defined groups can be determined and explained by reference to cultural and or biological characteristic believed to be inherent to the groups. And as the ideology, essentialisms rest on two assumptions. First, groups can be clearly delimited and groups members are more or less alike. Essentialisms and other negative consequences like this one. Of course, it can be very harmful to intercultural relations. Yeah. Although such categorizations are useful as a sense-making strategies for human behavior by Bruce Holmes 2012, if unchecked, if it is not controlled wisely, it can lead to more extreme understandings of cultural differences. This categorizations is very sensitive. What is the results of the social categorizations? Of course, ethnocentrism, stereotyping, and prejudice. And we have to know that these three are the roots of racism. Did we do that? One of them, ethnocentrism, stereotyping, or prejudice? Let's see. All right, otherizations or othering. Yeah, it is a form of social representations. Involves the objectifications of another person's or group. In the process, culture is used to account of all the views and behaviors of other people. And you know that the otherizations and othering ignores the complexity and diversity of individual characteristics, such as thoughts, emotions, and actions. Yeah, we don't care about your individual characteristics. or ability or even habit. Yeah, the ignoring or otherizations here just focus on the generalizations, and let's say the reductionism. This process leads to the reductionisms or essentialisms. Instead of seeing people from different cultural, linguistic backgrounds, yeah, in the eyes of people who are doing the otherizations, they just say that those people are merely the representative of a particular culture and tied to a rigid set of characteristics and behaviors. All right, the social categorizations and othering like this. People or individuals tend to categorize people in their social environment into groups and outgroups such as us and them. We also discussed this in the previous chapters. Actually, in group where, yeah, it is where we with people whom you feel connected to or owe a sense of loyalty and allegiance, such as our family members, our close friends, our familiar others, our team in a community, and many things. We feel that we are in group. We are in the situations that we are appreciated and accepted. But then the opposite one is the outgroup members, where this outgroup member are those with whom one feels emotionally and psychologically detached, such as with unfamiliar people, strangers, or members who are belonging to a competitive or the rival or opposing groups, so on and so on. All right, now let's discuss the ethnocentrism. What is actually ethnocentrism itself? Jackson 2014 wrote that it is a behavior, this kind of behavior that is categorized by the arrogance, vanity, and even the contempt for people who do not belong to one's in-group. And you know that ethnocentric thinking may cause us to make false assumptions and premature judgments about people who have been socialized in a different cultural environment. Through the process of primary socializations, people in all cultures develop expectations and shared understandings about the most appropriate ways to act, to behave, to speak in a different situations and contexts. And the ethnocentric thinking here, basically it leads us to the negative thinking. We make the assumptions, and mostly the assumptions is premature. So we see people based on our understanding only, not the reality of we see people not objectively. Yeah. The opposite of the ethnocentrism, we have the cultural relativism, where it refers to the view that beliefs, value systems, and social practices are culturally relative. That is, no culture is inherently superior to another. Ethnorelativism means to understand a communications practice from the other person's cultural frame of reference. The difference is only different. There is no particular party who is superior and the rest is inferior. No, they are just equal. They are just different. Yeah. Now, stereotyping. We come to this um, very important things, because later we have to question ourselves whether we did stereotyping or not. Yeah. Stereotyping is the result of ethnocentrism. Yeah, there is a strong tendency to characterize people from other cultural backgrounds unfairly and collectively, and of course mostly negatively. Yeah, a stereotype is a preconceived idea that attributes certain characteristics such as personality traits, intelligence, intentions, and behaviors to all the members of a particular social class or group of people. All right, before we go further, it is important to distinguish between stereotypes and the generalizations. Now, the generalization is the statement about a common trends within a group, but with the recognitions that further information is needed to ascertain whether the generalizations applies to a particular persons. Right, although stereotypes and generalizations may seem similar, actually they functions in different ways. The idea is that if, for example, somebody or you or we meet an Egyptian man and assume that he has many children, yeah, actually our assumptions leads or is the form of the stereotyping. We are stereotyping him. But then when you say to yourself about the previous scenario, a lot of Egyptians have many children. I wonder, or I think Sammy does. Then actually you are generalizing. Yeah. So you know clearly the difference. Stereotypes, whereas a stereotypes imposes one assumptions on others based on commonly held beliefs. Here, a generalization is a starting point. And you understand that much more information is needed, is required to determine if our ideas or our perceptions apply to a particular individual or group or situations. All right. We are not born with stereotypes. We learn the stereotypes during the process of the socializations. We learn from the messages from other members, our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our friends, and so on and so forth. And we believe that as we mature, we are influenced by portrayals of different groups in the media, such as televisions, drama, movies, comedy, newspaper, so on and so forth. We also got the understanding, the idea from our own life, such as when we go abroad and We met many people who are interculturally different from us. Stereotypes may also emerge out of fear, ignorance, or distrust of people who are different from ourselves. Well, I have collected the reasons why people resort to stereotyping. Yeah, the first is to quickly process new information about persons or situations. So, for take it easy, just do the stereotyping, and to organize the previous experiences, to stress the differences between themselves and other individuals or groups. Yeah, so to show that we are superior, that you are inferior, something like that. And the fourth one, to make predictions about other people's behavior. Sometimes we are experience these situations because we don't know and their individual characteristic. Then, okay, they are Chinese, they are Japanese, they are so we are assuming that they are similar with other people, and to simplify their life and so on. Well, the process of the stereotyping typically involves the steps like this. Individuals are categorized usually on the basis of easily identifiable characteristics, such as we only focus on their sex, ethnicity, country, religions, and so on and so forth. And also, next, a set of attributes is ascribed to all or most members of that category. Individuals belonging to the stereotype group are assumed to be similar to each other and different from other groups on this set of attributes. And the last, the set of attributes here is ascribed to any individual members of that category. Hastings and Brown, 1986, page 29, explains clearly about this process of stereotyping, about these steps. Well, Jackson's also note writing here as the experience of Hong Kong people who experience of the mainland. From my experience of the mainland, I have a bad impressions that people there are less civilized than Hong Kong people. They are untrustworthy, unfair, and unjust. Bribery and corruptions are all around in court, in school, in companies, and even in streets. They are less educated in the concepts of hygiene. They squat in toilets, spit around the streets, and throw rubbish all around. It is not surprising there are a lot of contagious diseases. Then the mainland Chinese are just inferior to us, Hong Kong people. Hence, it is torture for me to visit my relatives in the mainland. So it becomes the stereotypes that he or she is assuming that their culture is superior than mainland Chinese there because of the experience that he got from the visits to his or her relatives in mainland. All right, the stereotyping about groups of people can be based on wide range of characteristics. You know, we sometimes do this stereotyping based on their language or accent, or their, let's say, the ethnicity, physical appearance, nationality, religion, Muslim, Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, or so on, or atheist, so on. Geographic locations, or even class, social class, higher and lower, or age, young, or teenager, or adult, sex, or gender, so on and so forth. There are a lot of things can be the base, can be the indicator, can be based to do this stereotype. One of the examples is this. Asians are often assumed to excel in mathematics and the learning of musical instruments. I'm Asian, but I'm not. I'm not too excel in mathematics, and even I don't play any kind of musical instruments. So this is the assumptions or the understanding of people probably when they are meeting with the Asian people, and they have understood that Asians are excelling in mathematics and musical instruments. Yeah, the behavior. Now we learn about the sexism. It is also one of the form of the stereotyping actually. So now, what is the sexism? Yeah, stereotyping related to gender is common in many parts of the world. But here, the behavior, the conditions, or attitudes that promote stereotypes of social roles based on gender is referred to as sexism. Gender stereotyping refers to simplistic overgeneralizations about the gender characteristics, differences, and roles of male and females. Believing that, let's say, we believe that a woman is incapable of holding a public office because maybe we see that females are too emotional. Yeah, it is also examples of the stereotype. And denying men the opportunity to teach in a primary school because males are not good with young children. It is also the examples of the stereotypes, right? Stereotypes such as these examples are typically expressed through sexist language. Sometimes we use the words or phrase that unnecessarily emphasize gender or ignore or stereotype members of either sex. Well, actually, sexist language is linked to the power and operations. Let's say, males tend to be in the positions in power, yeah, and or superior, and female is inferior. Yeah. Of course, this sexist discourse often portrays females in a negative light. Yeah. Look at this experience. When two professors were formally introduced at the conference meeting as Dr. Martin Shore and Mrs. Negno, male lecturer was given more respect than female lecturer. Wow. What is happening here actually? I think it's very common in all over the world. I visited some countries and also I experienced the situations where people acknowledge that female is in an inferior level. Now let's try to understand the situations that when two professors are formally introduced in a conference meeting, yeah, and the male lecturer is accorded more respect. His academic title is verbally acknowledged, whereas the status of the Mrs. Nagano is ignored. Even though maybe she is also has a PhD and maybe much higher in higher academic rank. In this scenario, the language used privileges the male professors and diminishes the professional status of the professor naked. Yeah. Well, ageism. What is ageism? Ageism refers to the stereotyping or discriminations of people or persons or a group of people due to their age. Hopkins 2010 here making the understanding about it works to create and sustain assumptions about aged individuals and their behavior, attitudes, and values. Ageist stereotyping involves categorizing individuals into groups. They are grouped according to their age and then ascribing a certain characteristics and behaviors to all people of that age groups. Teenagers, senior citizens, and so on and so forth. In many cases, the overgeneralizations, of course, can be very harmful to people. For example, not all teenagers are irresponsible or immature or even selfish. In fact, many are quite the opposite. Not all people who are over 65 are too old and feeble to work. Yeah. Sometimes we also hear that older people are portrayed as mentally and physically challenged when labels such as old timers, old folks, and golden agers are used. Stereotypical language and image such as these examples can diminish people and lead to exclusions and other discriminatory practices. Well, during the 2012, Samuel et al. 2010, Sorrells 2012, identified a number of ways in which stereotypes can become ingrained and serve as barriers to intercultural communications. Yeah. The first, stereotypes can lead us to believe that a commonly held belief is actually true, when in fact it is not. Second, stereotypes may compel us to only accept information that is in accord with our previous perceptions of a particular outgroup. Even if we meet an individual who does not fit our preconceived ideas, we may choose to ignore these new informations. Yeah. And the third one, stereotypes are difficult to change, in part because many were formed in childhood. We learn the stereotypes from since we are child, through the messages from the people who love and respect, through the media. Then that's true that we may fail to modify the stereotype, even when it no longer fits with our actual observations and experience. And then the fourth one, when we stereotype, we assume that all members of group possess the same characteristic, and we fail to recognize or acknowledge individual variations. We don't care about the individual characteristics. We do not recognize the individual variations. What we focus with this, we assume that all members of a group possess the same characteristics. The fifth one, stereotypes generally reduce people to a single aspect of their identities. Yeah, their traits, their characteristics, or dimensions, overlooking a dynamic and multi-faceted nature of identities. And sixth, when we stereotype, we send and interpret messages in ways that do not convey recognitions of the unique individual characteristics of others. Instead, we rely on oversimplified. Wow. overgeneralized perceptions, which is not fair to people we are communicating with, as it reduces them as to mere cultural representatives. 7. Stereotypes can lead to the use of language that diminishes the worth of individuals, such as the sexist language, ageist discourse, and leads to inequality, of course. Then the 8th one, stereotypes, they values individuals and groups and can result in or perpetuate inequality, gender equality, inequality, age inequality, religious inequality, which is very damaging to intercultural relations. Well, let's move to the bias. Have you heard about the bias? What is bias? Hadley, 1992. For good or for bad, we all have biases. We see things in terms of what we know. To become more respectful intercultural communicator, it is our duty to have an understanding of what is meant by bias and prejudice. Yeah, like stereotyping, bias here is a common phenomenon that can negatively impact on the intercultural relations too. Bias is a personal preference, like or dislike. So it's focused on based on what we like and what we dislike. Of course, it can interfere our ability to be objective, to see other people, to see other things. Yeah. Now let's see the examples. In 2020, I went to a remote area in Indonesia where the majority of the populations have tattoos on their bodies. Honestly, this makes me uncomfortable when interacting with them. I feel they are a group of people who are not good in their attitude and not wise in taking care of their bodies. So what happens in this scenario? I see that the writer probably has bias assumptions that she or he doesn't like tattoos. But some people actually in that area, maybe they think that, what is that? Um, the people who have the tattoos, they like or they appreciate the art. Maybe they consider that tattoo is the art, it's the product of the art. So the bias is here. Yeah. Let's move to the prejudice. Prejudice is the refers to dislike or hatred of people, of a person's or a group, and it is formed without reasons. Yeah, so look at this one. Prejudice attitude include irrational feelings of dislike and even hatred for certain groups. Biased perceptions and belief about the group members that are not based on direct experience and first-hand knowledge and a readiness to behave in a negative and unjust ways toward members of the group. We learn to dislike or distrust people who are not like ourselves, as we are influenced by negative messages or image that we receive from those who are, let's say, closest to us, like our parents, our religious figures, and also from the media. Yeah, and Thus, the prejudicial thoughts are closely linked to rigid and faulty stereotypes that form during the primary socialization process. Prejudice, mostly people uh, prejudice people toward the uh, different accents, second language speakers, individuals with a different sexual orientations or preferences, believers of another religion, individuals who are not atheists, non-believers, for example, minority group members, foreigners, and people who have a different skin or hair color. These are mostly the indicators we see people differently. Yeah. Now, let's talk about the discriminations as it is also the reflections of the stereotyping or categorizations. Yeah. Discriminations can be thought of as the expressions of prejudice in action. Okay, it is similar to the prejudice. Basically, it is the prejudicial or unequal treatment of certain group individuals based on their um, memberships or perceived member of a particular group or category. Discriminations also can be in the multiple forms, and of course it can also encompasses many issues. For example, individuals or groups may be discriminated against based on their age, a language, accent, sex, gender, pregnancy, race, religion, even national origin, or even favorite sport. We can discriminate people based on this idea. And you know that people who are discriminated against do not enjoy the same privileges and respect as the rest of the society. All right, the term discriminations is day by day reduced, yeah, by many people, because many people are already aware of the situations. Now look at this from the United Nations International Conventions on the eliminations of all forms of racial discrimination, ICERD, 1989, defines that racial discrimination as any distinctions, exclusions, restrictions, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national ethnic origins, so on and so forth. This racial discrimination is commonly happening all over the world. We see people differently from us, then we do something bad. We underestimate them, we discriminate them, we give in unequal treatment to them, something like that. Now look at these examples of the discrimination. The Chinese student who was having difficulty adjusting to England wrote the following in her sojourn's diary, as cited in Jen Jackson 2014. The British don't accept us to be in their country. Discrimination is still there, though there may be laws to protect you. Now I feel more about my Chinese identity it will never equal to Western people who are too different. We don't understand or refuse to understand each other fully. They are too far ahead of us. I noticed the use of we, I versus they are. There is still a distinction. So this is the experience of this Chinese students who was having difficulties adjusting to England situations there. Discriminations may occur in all domains of life, in the workplace, social functions, in a public transportation, school, in education, in housing, so on and so on. There are many places that we can experience the discriminations. Discriminatory language. In Australia, the term abos is sometimes used for indigenous Australians. Uftas for gaming, queue jumpers for refugees or asylum seekers, welfare cheats for the unemployed, walks for European immigrants and their children, spaces for people living with cerebral palsy and geriatrics for older people. There are terms to be used. There are languages, vocabularies to be used to do the discrimination. Yeah. And these are the examples. Maybe you can find in your environment, your community, in your country. Discriminatory beliefs and practices are often driven by fear and ignorance and the craving of people of the power over others. And the formations of one's cultural identity can sometimes lead to hostility, hate, and discriminations directed against non-members of that culture. Strong in-group affiliations can foster ethnocentric practices, including discriminations and exclusions. In contexts where people are very superstitious, for example, a mental illness and physical abnormalities may be considered a curse. It is a consequence of the sins of parents, and it may be marginalized or hidden from mainstream society. And for the regular people who have good mental and physical, yeah, they may not make eye contact with people who are disabled and refrain from interacting with these people, with those people who have mental and physical abilities. Discrimination is there, the discriminatory practices. Yeah. Combating discriminations. Perceptions and attitude toward differences and disabilities can and do change over time. It's a good news. With more education, let's say the superstitions people, yeah, diminish, then there is more awareness and recognitions of the valuable contributions that disabled people can make in society, in their home environment, in the workplace, so on and so on. The pejorative labels used to identify people who are physically and mentally different from the majority are then considered unacceptable. Yeah, and yeah, and to erase the barriers to inequality, yeah, to people in many parts of the world are fighting discriminatory language and other practices. Look at this one. in some regions, individuals and groups are still pushing for equal educational benefits. In 2012, Malala Yousafzai, a 15-year-old Pakistani schoolgirl, I think we hear about this. I think you're familiar with this story. Survived a murder attempt by the Taliban, Islamic fundamentalists, as a fight for the right of girls to attend school in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. In 2013, she became the youngest nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. As she recovers, Malala continues to press for women's rights and education for all children. Inspired by her courage, young people and adults all over the world are joining her crusade to combat gender discriminations. Wow, it's a good news for people who are very often to get the discriminations. People are also combating other forms of discriminations. For example, some strive to protect language rights, equal compensations, protections from sexual harassment. Some also fight for disabled individuals to have more opportunities to actively contribute to society in a workplace, for example. Medical professionals, and in some cases, what is that? Caregivers may play a role in advocating for the rights of those who are affected by mental and physical disability. Groups may in a growing numbers of national anti-discriminations legislation. So some countries, maybe they have developed the anti-discriminations legislations. Yeah. In the US, for example, affirmative actions known as positive discriminations in the UK refers to education, business, or employment policies that aim to redress the negative historical impact of discriminations by taking factors such as race, sex, religion, gender, or national origin into considerations in hiring and promoting selections situations, racial quotas. In some educational and employment setting, racial quotas have been set. Yeah, there are numerical requirements for the selections and promotions of people from a group that is deemed disadvantaged, such as, let's say, African American students, female students, individuals from disadvantaged groups. Maybe it or can be admitted to college with lower entrance standard than the norm. Or maybe do you have in your country? In my country, we have. Of course, this policy is controversial, and you know that the opponent say that this is unfair treatment of the majority. Yeah. So there will be a challenge. There is a challenge for this action. Now let's move to the racism. As discussed in the previous chapter, race is a contested term that has no defensible biological basis. It is a social construction that historically has privileged people in positions of power. Let's say we remember the British, the white in the Britain, Australia, and the United States. the white people is superior and the black American is the inferior. Race has always been established as the relationships of dominations, oppressions, and privilege that position people differently in society. Through racism, the belief that one racial group is superior and the other racial groups are necessarily inferior. That is the racism. We have the types of racisms: individual racisms, institutional racisms, systematic racisms. Yeah? Individual racism refers to a person's attitudes, beliefs, and actions which can support or perpetuate racism. And institutional racism can result in differential access to goods, services, and opportunities for society. And systematic racism can lead to the mistreatment of people on a wide scale. Minorities in a particular nations may suffer injustices in all aspects of life due to racist policies. We also have the xenophobia. What is the xenophobia? Xenophobia is a severe aversion to or irrational fear, yeah, or phobia of foreigners or strangers, yeah. That is basically anyone who is different from oneself or one's in group, especially in terms of culture, ways of being, language, and political. On a regional or national level, this may lead to discriminatory policies and anti-migration legislations. For example, mass expulsions, brutal killings, immigrants, or particular ethnic groups, such as the atrocities that have taken place in Bosnia, Nazi Germany, and Darfur. Racism or xenophobia is the form of the social categorizations. It's the result of the social categorizations. While racism is linked to prejudice based on ethnicity, ancestry, or race, xenophobia is broader. It encompasses any kind of fear related to an individual or group perceived as being different. The target of this hostility may be a group that is not accepted by mainstream society, minorities, immigrants, members of other ethnic groups, so on and so forth. Overcoming the ethnocentricisms and identity biases. To be competent intercultural communicator, it is vital to acknowledge the impact of the socialization process on our identities and actions, verbal and non-verbal, as well as how we view the behavior of people who are different from ourselves. And to be mindful intercultural communicators, we must recognize the harmful effect of ethnocentrism and stereotyping, and take steps to recognize, accept, and celebrate cultural differences. And to enhance intercultural interactions, we need to recognize the dimensions of our identities that are meaningful to us, such as ethnicity, gender, religion, nationality. Well, in this chapter, we have discussed the negative consequences of social categorizations and other, especially in situations where individuals cling to a rigid sense of self, resist other ways of being, and do not respect the preferred identities of others. Ethnocentrisms, prejudice, discriminations, racism, xenophobia can destroy the opportunities for dialogue and friendship with people who have been socialized in different environments. In today's interconnected world, in today's globalization era, it is our duty, yeah, we to develop more awareness of the multiple dimensions of our identities and the ways in which our cultural perceptions and attitude can influence our interactions with people from outside or uh, outside our in groups. Yeah. We have to ask these questions to ourselves. Do you respect the identities of others? Are you attentive to messages that individuals from other linguistic or cultural backgrounds send about their preferred identities? Or do you avoid the use of sexist or ageist language? If an intercultural encounter does not go well, do you automatically assume that someone from another culture is discriminating against you? Do you quickly label the individual as a racist, or do you take time to reflect on other possible explanations for the miscommunications? After unsatisfactory intercultural interactions, do you reevaluate your own actions and responses, or do you tend to always blame the negative outcome on your communications partner? All of us experience emotion when we are experiencing the discriminations, stereotype, and racism. There are things that really hurts or harmful to us process of socialization. This question should be asked to ourselves. Whether we do all these things or not. If no, be careful. It can be very harmful to people. Being mindful of the language you use. Avoid the use of terms and jokes that belittle people from linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Knowing how you see yourself and wish to be positioned in various contexts are key elements in intercultural communications. Heightening self-awareness can help you to become a more successful communicator. It can enable you to be more sensitive to the preferred self-identities of people you interact with and more accepting of individual ways of being. These are the examples that we can do to be wise communicator, intercultural communicator. Opening your eyes to see cultural differences is one thing. Opening our heart to accept and respect the differences is another thing. To be open-minded and competent in intercultural context, we have to set aside our cultural biases, perceptions about beliefs, values, and norms, and our expectations on others. This process often involves a lot of internal struggles and anxieties. A way to cope with these internal struggles is to lighten up a bit and be able to laugh about ourselves. The key to deal with cross-cultural communication is to have a sense of humor. To avoid the ethnocentrism and stereotype, remember that people who have been socialized in other cultural contexts will not necessarily behave in the same way that we do. Their beliefs, values, and practices may differ. They are different. Therefore, instead of interpreting anything new based on our own social and cultural norms and value, try to understand how a concept, product, or practice fits into the other culture. When people act differently from what you expect, try to avoid making snap judgments. Directly you labeling anything different as a strange, weird, or wrong. No, don't do that. Yeah. When interacting with people from a different culture, we may need to adjust our behaviors. I'm still learning to put myself into others' shoes and interpret others' behavior from their cultural perspectives instead of mine. When I come across people of other cultures violating the rules of our culture, I step back and see the causes of problem in miscommunication before I make negative comments on others. How can we judge anything if the standard is not the same? It is a university student's interview as written in the Jacksons. Making a effort to develop a friendship with people from different linguistic and cultural background can be one of the best ways to enhance one's intercultural understanding. And we have to do this, that plant in your mind that I'm still learning to put myself into others and interpret others. Change your thoughts and change your world. We cannot change others. We cannot change others' values, point of views. But what we can do is that change our world, our views, our perspective. There are a lot of differences among us. We cannot discriminate them. We cannot underestimate them. They have their own capacity, their own ability, their own uniqueness, even ours, even we also we have. We have come to the end of these sessions, and there are discussions questions for us, and try to answer the questions here, and discuss with your partners, your friends, your colleagues, and many more. And here's the reference. I think that's it about today's presentations, about today's class. We'll be meeting in the next topic, and enjoy your life, your situations with different people around you. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.